The night after my husband's funeral, his family tried to force me to sign papers I wasn't allowed to read. They said the $640,000 insurance naturally belongs to blood relatives, and that I should do the right thing and hand it over. What they didn't know was that my husband left a second will, one they were never meant to see, and it had only one name on it. My name is Sarah. I'm 48 years old, and for the last 5 years, my world had shrunk to the size of a hospital bed. My husband, Mark, was the brilliant, laughing center of my universe, and watching a degenerative illness slowly steal him from me piece by piece was a pain I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. And my worst enemies were sitting right in front of me. I met Mark's family 20 years ago. From the very beginning, I was an outsider. They were old money, the kind of people whose family tree had its own leather-bound volume in the library. Their wealth wasn't just in their bank accounts, it was in their posture, in the casual way they dismissed anyone not born into their world. I was the daughter of a mechanic and a librarian. To them, I was a curiosity at best, a social climber at worst. His mother, Eleanor, was the matriarch, a woman sculpted from ice and disapproval. The first time I met her, she'd looked at my simple black dress and said, "How practical," with a smile that never reached her cold blue eyes. For 2 decades, every compliment she gave me was a veiled insult. Every question was an interrogation of my background, my ambitions, my worthiness. His older brother, Richard, was the heir apparent who had failed to be a parent in anything. He'd burned through a series of ventures, each one funded by a loan from his parents, or, as I would later discover, from Mark. He had the arrogant swagger of a man who had never once faced a consequence for his own failures. He saw Mark's success not as something Mark had earned, but as an extension of the family's portfolio, a portfolio he believed was his birthright. And then there was Jessica, Richard's wife. She was the quietest of the three, but in many ways the most dangerous. She was a master of the venomous whisper, the concerned look that was actually a judgment, the passive-aggressive comment that could poison a room. She was Eleanor's loyal lieutenant, always ready to reinforce the family's narrative, that they were the core and I was just a temporary attachment. For 20 years I tried. I hosted their holiday dinners. I remembered their birthdays. I listened to their endless self-congratulatory stories. When Mark's father passed away, I was the one who managed the house, the food, the guests, while Eleanor held court, accepting condolences like a queen. When Mark got sick, my efforts redoubled. The family support was purely cosmetic. They'd visit for 10 minutes, take a sad-faced selfie for their social media, and leave. They'd call and ask how he was doing, but they wouldn't listen to the answer. It was a box-ticking exercise in familial duty. I was the one who held his hand through the terrifying nights. I was the one who learned to manage his medications, to understand the doctor's jargon, to advocate for him when he was too weak to speak. I was the one who sold my own small portfolio of stocks, a nest egg my father had painstakingly built for me to cover the experimental treatments the insurance wouldn't touch. I poured every ounce of my love, my energy, and my own financial security into giving him a few more months, a few more comfortable days. They knew I was liquidating my assets. I remember Richard saying once, with a dismissive wave of his hand, "It's wonderful you're so committed, Sarah. Mark is lucky to have such a devoted nurse." A nurse, not a wife, not a partner, a service provider. The funeral was a masterclass in their hypocrisy. Eleanor stood at the front of the church, a pillar of tragic grace, accepting hugs from people who whispered what a strong woman she was. Richard gave a eulogy that was more about the family's proud lineage than it was about the man his brother had actually been. I sat in the front pew, feeling like a ghost at my own husband's farewell. People would pat my shoulder and say, "You were so good to him," as if I were a hired hand who had done a satisfactory job. After the service, back at the family mansion that Mark and I had never called home, the atmosphere shifted. The performance of grief was over. The air grew thick with a new, predatory energy. Eleanor, holding a glass of sherry, cornered me by the fireplace. "We'll need to be practical now, Sarah," she said, her voice low and firm. "There are arrangements to be made, financial matters." I just nodded, too numb to process her words. She patted my arm, a gesture that was meant to look comforting but felt like a claim. "Don't you worry about a thing. Richard will handle the important details. It's a burden a widow shouldn't have to bear." Then she turned toward a group of friends and said, with a theatrical sigh, "Now the real work begins." I didn't understand what she meant then. I thought she was talking about the estate, the legalities, the slow, painful process of dismantling a life. I was naive. The real work she was talking about was erasing me. 2 days later, I was summoned to the house. Not asked, summoned. A text from Richard, "Family meeting, mother's house, 3 p.m., don't be late." The living room was exactly as I always remembered it. Cold, formal, and immaculate, a museum of their own self-importance. Eleanor sat in her high-backed armchair, the throne. Richard and Jessica were on the sofa opposite me, a united front. That's when Richard slid the paper across the table. "What is this?" I asked, my voice hoarse. It was the first thing I'd said since I sat down. "It's a waiver," Richard explained, leaning forward. "It assigns you as a co-signer on the life insurance payout, allowing me, as the estate's preliminary executor, to move the funds into a trust, the family trust." I stared at the legal jargon. My mind was a fog of grief, but a tiny, sharp point of clarity was beginning to emerge. The policy. Mark named me as the sole beneficiary. Why would it go into a trust? Jessica chimed in, her voice dripping with counterfeit sweetness. "Oh, Sarah, Mark was so unwell at the end. He wasn't thinking clearly. He would have wanted his legacy to be protected, to stay within the family." "I am his family," I said, my voice trembling slightly. Eleanor let out a short, sharp sigh, as if my very existence was a tedious inconvenience. "Sarah, let's not be difficult. You were his wife, and we appreciate the care you gave him. But this is a family legacy. This is blood money." Blood money. The phrase hit me like a slap. "It's $640,000, Richard said, his tone shifting from patient to demanding. "That kind of money needs to be managed properly. It's for the family's future, for my children's future." My gaze hardened. I looked at his expensive watch, his perfectly tailored suit. I thought of the $30,000 I had transferred to Mark 6 months ago, money he'd then given to Richard to save another of his can't-miss business ideas from collapsing. My money. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silent room like a stone. Richard blinked. "What? No, I'm not signing it." Eleanor's mask of civility cracked, her eyes narrowed. "Don't be a fool, Sarah. You don't understand these things. This money is not for you to go on a shopping spree." "A shopping spree?" I felt a cold anger beginning to burn through the fog of my grief. "I sold my father's legacy to pay for your son's medical bills while you were posting sad emojis on Facebook. Don't you dare talk to me about shopping sprees." Richard stood up, his face flushing with anger. "That was your duty as his wife. This is different. This is our birthright. Mark would have wanted to provide for his mother, for his brother, not just you. The you hung in the air, dripping with 20 years of condescension. You, the outsider. You, the help. You, the temporary fixture who had outstayed her welcome. I am his widow, I said, my voice gaining strength. The policy is in my name. The money is legally mine. For now, Jessica murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. Eleanor rose from her chair, a chillingly regal figure. You were a caretaker, dear. A very dedicated one, I'll grant you that. But your service is concluded. You will sign that paper. You will not stand in the way of this family's security. If you force us to, we will take legal action. We will prove Mark was not of sound mind when he made you the beneficiary. We will drag your name through the mud. Do you understand me? I stood up, my hands shaking, but my spine rigid. I looked at the three of them, the queen, the failed prince, the whispering courtier. They weren't grieving, they were circling a kill. I understand perfectly, I said, my voice colder than I knew I was capable of. You see me as a problem to be managed, a loose end to be tied up. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving the unsigned paper on the table. The silence behind me was heavy, furious, and absolute. As I closed the heavy front door, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the declaration of war. The first salvo came the next morning. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Thorne, a man's voice said. It was smooth, confident, and utterly devoid of warmth. My name is Arthur Davenport. I was Mark's and his family's longtime legal counsel. I'm calling to follow up on yesterday's meeting. Their lawyer. Of course, they hadn't wasted a second. There's nothing to follow up on, Mr. Davenport, I said, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. I think there is, he said, his tone paternalistic and condescending. Eleanor and Richard are deeply concerned. They feel you're acting out of grief, and it's clouding your judgment. They've instructed me to arrange a preliminary probate hearing to discuss the administration of the estate. We've scheduled it for next Tuesday. A cold dread washed over me. I haven't agreed to any hearing. It's not really a matter of agreement, Mrs. Thorne. As the family's representative, I'm simply moving things forward. Richard will be petitioning to be named executor, given the questions surrounding Mark's state of mind in his final months. There it was, the threat Eleanor had made now being put into motion. They were going to paint my husband as mentally incompetent to invalidate his final wishes. I'll need to consult my own lawyer, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Davenport chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. Your own lawyer? Sarah, that's hardly necessary. It will just complicate things and incur needless expense. I'm here to represent the estate's best interests, and right now, that means consolidating assets and ensuring the family is secure. The family or his family? I shot back. There was a pause. They are one and the same, he said coolly. I'll have my assistants send over the details for the hearing. I strongly advise you to reconsider signing the waiver before then. It would make everything cleaner. He hung up. I stood in my kitchen, the silence of the house pressing in on me. Mark had been gone for less than a week, and his family, aided by their shark of a lawyer, was already trying to legally erase me. Get your own lawyer. The words echoed in my head. He'd said it was unnecessary. That meant it was essential. I spent the next hour online, not searching for grief counselors, but for probate litigators. I wasn't looking for a stuffy old man in a wood-paneled office. I was looking for a fighter. I found her on the 3rd page of results, Anya Sharma. The photo on her website was of a sharp, intelligent woman in her late 30s. Her bio wasn't filled with fluff about tradition and heritage. It was filled with words like aggressive, strategic, and uncompromising. Her firm specialized in contested estates and financial disputes. One testimonial read, "She doesn't just fight for you, she dismantles the other side." I called her office. Her assistant told me she was booked for weeks. "Please," I said, the desperation cracking my voice. "My husband just passed away. His family is trying to seize his life insurance and have him declared incompetent. Their lawyer just called me." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Hold on," the assistant said. A minute later, a new voice came on the line. "This is Anya Sharma. You have 5 minutes. Tell me everything." Her voice was exactly like her picture. Sharp, focused, no nonsense. I laid it all out. The 20 years of being an outsider, the illness, the money I'd spent, the meeting, the waiver, the $640,000, Davenport's call. I didn't cry. My grief was now a block of ice in my chest, and my anger was the flame beneath it. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. "Okay," Anya said. "First of all, I'm so sorry for your loss. And I'm even more sorry that you're having to deal with these vultures." The validation in her voice was so powerful, it almost broke me. "They're making a classic, greedy mistake," she continued, her voice shifting into a strategic gear. "They're moving too fast, and they're underestimating you. That's how we'll beat them. From this moment on, you do not speak to any of them. Not Eleanor, not Richard, not Jessica, and especially not Arthur Davenport. If they call, you say, 'Please direct all communication to my attorney, Anya Sharma,' and then you hang up. Do you understand?" "Yes," I said. "Good. Second, do not, under any circumstances, sign anything. Don't even sign for a package they send you. Nothing. Third, I want you to go through Mark's things. Specifically, his office. Look for any and all financial documents, bank statements, loan agreements, tax returns, and look for his will. There has to be one. Davenport is acting on behalf of the family, but the will is what matters." "They claim he wasn't of sound mind," I whispered. "Let them claim it," Anya said, and I could almost hear her smile. "That's a very high bar to clear in court, especially when the primary beneficiary is the spouse, who was also the primary caregiver. They're bluffing, trying to scare you into folding. We're not going to fold. We're going to break them." She told me to gather everything I could find and come to her office the day after tomorrow. "And Sarah," she said just before she hung up. "Yes?" "Welcome to the fight. I'm glad to have you on my side." Hanging up the phone, I felt something I hadn't felt since Mark's diagnosis, a flicker of hope. I was no longer a grieving widow, alone in a silent house. I had an ally, and I had a mission. I went straight to Mark's office. It was a room I hadn't been able to bring myself to enter since he died. It still smelled like him, a faint mix of old books, coffee, and the sandalwood aftershave I'd bought him for his last birthday. The grief hit me again, a physical blow that made me lean against the doorframe. "Stay focused, Sarah." Anya's voice was in my head. I took a deep breath and walked to his large oak desk. It was neat, as always. Mark was a meticulous man. I started with the filing cabinet. The first drawer was labeled Financials. I pulled it open. Inside were folders, neatly tabbed, taxes, investments, mortgage. I pulled out the one labeled Bank Statements. I started going through them, year by year. I found the records of the large transfers from my savings account into our joint account. And then I found what I was looking for, the corresponding transfers from our joint account to Richard Thorne. There were 3 of them over the past 4 years, one for $25,000, one for $30,000, and another for $30,000 just 8 months ago. A total of $85,000. Each one was noted in the transaction description, RT business loan. I remembered the arguments. Mark, pale and tired, on the phone with his brother. "Richard, I can't keep doing this," he'd said once. "Sarah and I need this money for my treatments. Richard must have laid on the guilt because Mark always caved. It's the last time," Mark would promise me. "He just needs a little help to get over the hump." But the most damning thing wasn't the bank statements. Tucked into the back of the folder was a smaller envelope. Inside were 2 promissory notes, handwritten by Richard, but signed by both brothers. They detailed the loans with a laughable payment plan that he had clearly never followed. But the second note, the one for the last $30,000, had a sentence scribbled at the bottom in Mark's handwriting. It was weak and shaky, but his words were clear. "Eleanor is aware of this loan and has guaranteed its repayment from her personal assets if Richard defaults. Verbal agreement, 10/14. My heart hammered in my chest. Eleanor, the matriarch, the one who held the family's honor so dear, had personally guaranteed her deadbeat son's loan. A loan taken from a dying man and his wife. A loan they now pretended never existed while they tried to steal another $640,000. I carefully placed the documents into a fresh folder. This wasn't just about the insurance anymore. This was about their lies. All of them. I kept searching. In the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, under a stack of old tax returns, was a large, sealed manila envelope. On the front, in Mark's familiar, elegant script, were 2 words, "For Sarah." My hands trembled as I picked it up. It was thick, heavy. I ran my thumb over his handwriting. This felt different, more formal. I almost tore it open right there, but Anya's voice echoed in my mind. "Gather everything. Bring it to me." I tucked the large envelope into my... The air in Mark's office was thick with his absence. It still smelled of him. Old books, brewing coffee, and the faint, lingering sense of the sandalwood aftershave I'd bought him for our last anniversary. For a moment, it was so real I expected him to walk in, a weary smile on his face, and ask how my day was. But the silence that answered was vast and absolute. My fingers trembled as they rested on the large manila envelope. For Sarah. His handwriting, a familiar, slightly impatient scrawl, was a punch to the gut. Beside it, the promissory notes detailing Richard's $85,000 debt felt cheap and tawdry. They were proof of his hypocrisy, a grubby little secret. This envelope, however, felt sacred. It had weight. It was the last piece of Mark I had yet to discover, the final conversation we would ever have. Grief, which had been a suffocating blanket for days, sharpened into a needlepoint of fear. What if it was just a goodbye, a final, loving farewell that would only shatter what was left of my composure? "I don't know if I can take it, Mark. I don't know if I can read your last words." But Anya Sharma's voice echoed in my head, sharp and no nonsense. "Find his papers. We need ammunition." This wasn't just a letter. It was a clue. Mark was a meticulous man, a planner. He wouldn't leave me unprepared. He knew his family. He knew them better than anyone. My decision made, I reached for the heavy brass letter opener on his desk, its familiar coolness a small comfort. The sound of the paper tearing was a violent rip in the quiet sanctuary of the room. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. I slid my fingers inside. There were 2 documents. The first was a letter, several pages long, folded in thirds. The second was a thick, professionally bound document, its cover bearing the stark title, Last Will and Testament of Mark Anthony Harrison. It was dated 6 months ago. 6 months ago, when the doctors had been clear there was no miracle coming. 6 months ago, when Eleanor had clinked her spoon against a teacup and suggested Mark's care might be better managed in a facility. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the letter. I had to read it first. I needed to hear his voice before I could face the cold finality of the law. I unfolded the pages. "My Sarah," it began. The tears I thought I'd run out of pricked my eyes. I sank into his leather desk chair, the worn material sighing under my weight. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I had to leave you to deal with what comes next. I fought as hard as I could, my love, not for me, but for more time with you. I know what they're like. I can hear them now. Mother performing her tragic grace for an audience of one. Richard calculating his inheritance before my body is even cold. Jessica with her venomous whispers of support that are really just judgments. For 20 years, you put up with it for my sake. You absorbed their slights, their condescension, their relentless campaign to remind you that you were the outsider. You, the help. You, the temporary fixture. I saw it all, and I loved you all the more for the grace you showed them. A grace they never, ever deserved. They think my death is a transaction, a portfolio to be rebalanced. They will come for the insurance money. They will call it family money or some other nonsense. They will tell you it's for the good of the trust, to preserve the Harrison legacy. Their legacy is built on entitlement and emotional cowardice, Sarah. Don't you let them touch it." The words on the page blurred. He knew. He had seen it all coming. He had sat in this very chair, weak and dying, and plotted how to protect me. The block of ice in my chest began to fracture. "I know you sold your apartment. I know you liquidated your portfolio. I saw the statements you tried to hide from me. Did you think I wouldn't notice? You poured your own future into a desperate hope for mine. It broke my heart, Sarah. You were my wife, not my caretaker. My partner, not my sponsor. That money was yours, and what they are trying to steal now is not just my insurance policy. It's the nest egg you sacrificed for me. Blood money. The phrase Richard had spat at me echoed in my mind, but now it sounded pathetic, hollow. The real blood money was the life and security I had willingly drained from my own accounts to give him a few more comfortable months, while his family sent flower arrangements and offered empty platitudes. The letter continued, his handwriting growing a little shakier on the second page. So I did something about it. The will they know about, the one their vulture Davenport drew up years ago, is now just a piece of paper. The document with this letter is my real will, my final will. It is ironclad. I had it drafted by a lawyer they've never heard of. On the day I signed it, I had my competency certified, in writing, by Dr. Evans, a neurologist from Johns Hopkins, and a psychiatrist. 3 doctors, Sarah, all confirming I was of sound mind and body, well, sound mind anyway, and under no duress. Let them try to prove otherwise. Let them bring their fight. I've already built the fortress. Don't let them bully you. Don't let them erase you. You were the best part of my life. You were my entire life. They were just relatives. Fight them, Sarah. Use what I've given you. Live the life we were supposed to have. Be happy. That is my final wish. All my love forever, Mark. I folded the letter, my movements slow and deliberate. My hands were perfectly steady now. The tears had stopped. The grief was still there, a deep, hollow ache, but it was no longer a weakness. It had been transmuted into something else, something cold, hard, and diamond-sharp. It was rage, a pure, righteous rage that burned away the fog of sorrow. I picked up the bound will. It felt heavy, a weapon. I didn't need to read every clause. I flipped to the dispositive provisions, the section that dictates who gets what. My eyes scanned the dense legal text until I found the paragraph. It was clear, concise, and brutal in its simplicity. I hereby revoke all prior wills and codicils. I give, devise, and bequeath the entirety of my estate, both real and personal, of whatsoever kind and wheresoever situated, to my beloved wife, Sarah Connolly Harrison, for her sole use and benefit. Should my wife not survive me, then and only then shall my estate be divided as detailed in Appendix A. One name. My name. There was no family trust, no carve-out for Eleanor's comfort, no mention of Richard or Jessica. He had written them out of his life as cleanly and completely as they had tried to write me out. He had not just left me his money, he had left me his validation, he had left me his fury, he had left me a declaration of war. They were wrong. The thought was no longer a whisper of defiance, but a statement of fact. I stood up and looked around the office. It was no longer a museum of grief. It was a war room. I picked up the promissory notes Richard had signed, the ink on his arrogant signature a stark black against the white paper. I placed them neatly next to Mark's will. Evidence, ammunition, instructions. My phone felt cool and solid in my hand. I dialed Anya Sharma's number. She answered on the second ring. Anya Sharma. Her voice was a blade. Anya, it's Sarah Harrison. My own voice was different. The tremor was gone. It was low, controlled, and utterly devoid of the grief that had choked it just hours before. There was a slight pause. Sarah? You sound different. Did you find anything? I looked at the documents arrayed on Mark's desk. The letter, the will, the promissory notes, a complete arsenal. Yes, I said. I found everything. Another pause, this one charged with professional curiosity. Go on. Mark knew what they would do, I said, my voice as cold as the justice I was about to deliver. He left me a second will. He left me proof of his competency. He left me Richard's IOUs. He left me instructions. The silence on the other end of the line was electric. I could practically hear the gears turning in Anya's mind, the strategy forming. The predatory smile I imagined was spreading across her face. Sarah, she finally said, and her voice was laced with something that sounded like pure, unadulterated glee. Don't move. I'm on my way. I hung up the phone. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, striping the mahogany desk in bars of gold and black. I felt Mark's presence then, not as a sorrowful memory, but as a silent partner standing beside me, his hand on my shoulder. Eleanor and Richard had wanted a fight over money they believed was their birthright. They had no idea. This was never about the money. It was a promise, and the war they had declared was one they had already lost. The air in Mark's office, thick with the scent of old books, coffee, and sandalwood aftershave, had always been my sanctuary. Now, it was a time capsule. I knelt on the floor, the coarse fibers of the rug pressing into my knees, and held the thick vellum envelope. For Sarah, his handwriting declared, in the familiar, decisive slant I knew as well as my own, to be opened in the event of my death. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a document, it was a final conversation. My fingers, clumsy with the grief that had settled deep in my bones, fumbled with the wax seal. It cracked under my thumb, a sound like a tiny bone breaking. and the last barrier between us fell away. Inside were two things. The first was the will, its formal, legal language, a stark contrast to the second, a single folded sheet of his personal stationery. I unfolded his letter first, my heart hammering against my ribs. My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and my worst fear has come true. I have left you alone to deal with my family. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I know what they are. I've known my whole life. The condescension, the entitlement, the bottomless, grasping need. I spent 20 years trying to shield you from the worst of it, and my greatest regret is that my death will be the moment they finally feel free to show you their true faces. They will come for the money, my love, all of it. They see it as theirs, a birthright I merely held in trust. They will call you an outsider, a caretaker, a temporary fixture whose service is concluded. They will try to make you feel small, to make you feel guilty for what is rightfully, legally, and morally yours. Do not let them. Grief is a fog, Sarah. It will try to suffocate your anger. Don't let it. Your anger is your compass right now. It will point you toward justice, my justice, our justice. The document enclosed with this letter is my final will and testament. It is ironclad. I had it drawn up a year ago after my diagnosis. I saw 3 different doctors, all of whom certified in writing that I was of sound mind and body. Their letters are attached. My family's threats will be toothless, their accusations hollow. Everything I have is yours. It was always for you. You were my life's great work, my masterpiece. Not the business, not the money, you. Now you must fight for it, not just for the money, but for the principle. Richard's IOUs are in the bottom right-hand drawer. Use them. My mother's pride is her weakness. Use it. Do not let them erase me, Sarah. Do not let them rewrite our story into one where you were a footnote. I love you. I have loved you from the moment I saw you, and I will love you long after the stars burn out. Now go give them hell. Yours forever, Mark. A sob tore from my throat, raw and ragged. It wasn't a sound of despair, but of a devastating, clarifying release. The block of ice in my chest didn't just crack, it shattered, and in its place, a cold fire began to burn. He knew. He had seen it all coming. He had armed me from beyond the grave. Your anger is your compass. He had given me permission to feel the fury I had been trying to suppress beneath the weight of my sorrow. I laid his letter on the desk, my hand stroking his name. I will, my love, I whispered into the quiet room. I promise. Then I picked up my phone. My fingers were steady as I dialed Anya Sharma's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and alert. Anya Sharma. Anya, it's Sarah Harrison. My own voice was different. The tremor was gone, replaced by a low, calm certainty. There was a short pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind. Tell me. I have promissory notes from Richard Harrison to Mark's estate totaling $85,000, I said, my eyes flicking to the drawer Mark had indicated. And I have a second will. A second will? Her voice quickened, shedding its professional reserve for a flicker of predatory interest. Dated 1 year ago, it revokes all previous versions and leaves 100% of the estate to me. It's accompanied by notarized letters from 3 separate physicians certifying Mark's mental competence at the time of signing. The silence on the other end of the line was electric. When Anya finally spoke, her voice was laced with something that sounded like pure, unadulterated glee. Mrs. Harrison, she said, the formality a stark contrast to her tone. They brought a knife to a nuclear war. When can you be here? An hour later, I sat across from Anya in her office. It was the antithesis of the Harrison mansion, a sleek, modern space on the 24th floor overlooking the city. Glass, steel, and black leather. No suffocating white, no portraits of dead ancestors judging from the walls. This was not a museum of self-importance. It was a command center. On the polished surface of her desk, I laid out my ammunition: Mark's final will, the 3 doctors' letters, and the 2 promissory notes signed in Richard's arrogant scrawl. Anya, a woman who seemed to vibrate with focused energy, picked up the will first. Her dark eyes scanned the pages, quick and efficient. A thin, dangerous smile touched her lips. She set it down and read the doctor's letters, one by one. "Well," she said, leaning back in her chair. The leather creaked in protest. Their entire case, the threat of having Mark declared incompetent, is not just dead, it was never born. She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the stack of letters. This is unimpeachable. To challenge this would be to invite professional ruin and court-ordered sanctions. Their lawyer, if he has half a brain, will know that the second he sees these. She then slid the promissory notes toward her. She examined the signatures, the dates, and these, she murmured, her smile widening, "These are the offense. You told me on the phone that Eleanor guaranteed his debt." Verbally, in her living room, she said, "The family will make it right." Blood money. The phrase echoed in my mind, no longer a slap, but a rallying cry. Verbal contracts can be tricky, but a mother guaranteeing her son's debt in front of a witness, that's a powerful narrative for a judge, Anya said. "We won't even need to get that far. This is leverage. This is how we dismantle them." She folded her hands on the desk, her expression shifting from triumphant to strategic. "So, Sarah, the question is no longer about defending your inheritance. The insurance policy is yours. The estate is yours. That's a settled fact. The question now is, what do you want?" I thought of Eleanor's icy dismissal, Richard's sneering condescension, you, the help. I thought of 20 years of biting my tongue, of smiling through their veiled insults, of making myself smaller so Mark's life could be easier. I thought of Mark's letter. "Go give them hell. I want them to know they lost," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the steel girders of the building around us. "I want the $85,000 Richard owes the estate, and I want them to understand unequivocally that I am not a footnote. I am the story." Anya's eyes gleamed with approval. "Good, because my initial plan was to send their lawyer a polite cease and desist. My new plan is considerably more aggressive." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We don't just send a letter. We request a meeting, all parties. You, me, Eleanor, Richard, and their counsel. We will call it a final clarification of the estate. We let them walk into that room believing they still have the upper hand." "They'll come," I said. "Eleanor can't resist the opportunity to perform her role as the grieving matriarch trying to impose order." "Exactly," Anya confirmed. "She'll see it as her stage, and on that stage, in front of her lawyer, we will present Mark's final will. We will present the certifications of sanity. And then, once their legal foundation has been turned to dust, we will present Richard's promissory notes and demand immediate repayment to the estate." She let the plan hang in the air, a masterpiece of strategic cruelty. It was perfect. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was a public humiliation executed with surgical precision. It used their own arrogance as the bait. "They won't be able to attack you or Mark's memory," Anya continued. "They'll be too busy trying to figure out how to explain an $85,000 debt to their own lawyer. We'll have them. cornered, exposed, and accountable. My grief for Mark was still a vast, aching sea inside me, but now a lighthouse beam cut through the fog. His lighthouse, his plan. I was no longer drifting, I was sailing toward a specific shore. Anya picked up her phone. "I'll have my assistant draft the meeting request right now. We'll give them 48 hours notice, just enough time for them to feel confident, but not enough time to dig up any new lies." She made the call, her instructions crisp and decisive. While she spoke, I looked out the window at the sprawling city below. From up here, the cars looked like insects, all moving according to some unseen, intricate plan. For the first time since Mark's diagnosis, I felt like I was no longer a pedestrian about to be crushed by traffic. I was up here, in the tower, looking down at the board. Anya hung up the phone and looked at me, a silent question in her eyes. "Are you ready?" I gave her a slow, deliberate nod. The quiet widow was gone. The compliant daughter-in-law had been a fiction for years. What was left was the woman Mark had loved, the woman he had trusted to finish his fight. The invitation was sent. The trap was set. It was time to collect. The conference room in Anya Sharma's office was a glass and steel cage suspended 12 floors above the city. It was a world away from the suffocating white of Eleanor's mansion. Here, the colors were charcoal gray, chrome, and the sharp blue of the afternoon sky. The air didn't smell of lemon polish and old money. It smelled of nothing at all, a sterile vacuum waiting to be filled with conflict. It was perfect. Anya sat opposite me at the long, polished table, a fortress of calm in a dark gray suit. Before her was a single, slim file. My file. Our ammunition. "They're due in 5 minutes, she said, her voice utterly devoid of warmth or anxiety. It was the voice of a surgeon before the first incision. "Remember the plan, Sarah. Let them talk. Let them expose themselves. The more rope they ask for, the more we give them." I nodded, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap my knuckles were white. Grief was no longer a block of ice in my chest. It had been superheated into a quiet, simmering rage. They think this is a negotiation. They think they're here to dictate terms. I looked out the window, at the cars crawling like insects below. For 20 years, I had made myself small to fit into their world. Today, I was going to show them how large I could be. The intercom on the table buzzed softly. "Miss Sharma, the Harrison family is here." "Send them in, please," Anya replied. The glass door swung open. Eleanor entered first, a queen surveying a territory she found distasteful. She was dressed in black silk, a single strand of pearls at her throat, her face a mask of tragic grace that was starting to look strained at the edges. Richard followed, his suit a little too tight, his face flushed with a confidence he hadn't earned. He gave me a dismissive glance, his expression saying, "You're in our world now, little bird." Jessica trailed behind him like a venomous shadow, her eyes darting around the room, assessing, judging. They were circling a kill, so sure of their victory they could already taste it. They took the seats opposite us, a united front of entitlement. Eleanor placed her leather handbag on the table with a soft, definitive thud. It was the opening move in a chess match she had no idea she was about to lose. "Miss Sharma," Richard began, leaning forward with an air of magnanimous authority. He didn't look at Anya, he looked at me. "We're glad you convinced Sarah to be reasonable. This whole situation has been an unfortunate distraction during a time of family grief." Family grief. The words were a lie, hollow and obscene. Their grief was for a bank account, not a man. Anya didn't flinch. "We're here to discuss the estate of Mark Harrison. Let's not pretend it's anything else." Richard's smile was a predatory slick of oil. Precisely. The family has a vested interest in preserving Mark's legacy. That's why we set up the trust. The life insurance policy, the $640,000, is the cornerstone of that. It needs to be transferred immediately. We have the paperwork ready. He slid a folder across the table. It stopped inches from Anya's hand. She ignored it. You seem to be operating under a significant misapprehension, Mr. Harrison, Anya said, her tone as sharp and clean as the edge of a scalpel. I don't think so, Richard countered, his voice oozing a sympathy so fake it felt oily. He turned to me again. Sarah, we know this is hard for you, but Mark's finances were always a family affair. This money was meant to secure the Harrison name, not for personal use. You, the outsider, you, the help, you, the temporary fixture whose service is concluded. The unspoken words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Jessica leaned toward her husband, her voice a conspiratorial whisper, loud enough for all to hear. She just doesn't understand, Richard. It's not her fault. That was it, the final condescension. I felt a switch flip inside me, a cold, clean click. I looked at Anya. She gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. The performance was over. Actually, I understand perfectly, I said. My own voice surprised me. It was low and steady, a stone thrown into the placid surface of their arrogance. All three of them turned to look at me, their surprise visible. The quiet widow had spoken. Anya chose that moment to act. She opened her file and slid a thick, bound document across the table. It was heavier, more substantial than Richard's flimsy folder. This is the last will and testament of Mark Harrison, she announced, her voice ringing with finality. It was drafted and signed 6 weeks ago. It revokes all previous wills and codicils. Richard stared at it as if it were a snake. What is this? We have his will. It's with our family lawyer. You have an old will, Anya corrected him, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. This one, she tapped the document, is ironclad. It was witnessed by 2 partners at this firm and accompanied by letters from 3 separate physicians certifying Mark's complete soundness of mind at the time of signing. Eleanor's mask of composure finally cracked. A line of fury appeared between her sculpted eyebrows. This is absurd. Mark would never do something like this behind our backs. Wouldn't he? I asked, holding her gaze. For the first time, she didn't look away. For the first time, she saw me. Yes, I thought, look at me. Look at what you've created. Anya continued, dismantling their world piece by piece. The will is quite straightforward. Mark Harrison's entire estate, including all properties, stocks, liquid assets, and the full payout from his life insurance policy, is left to one person. She paused, letting the silence stretch, letting them drown in it. Richard's face was turning a blotchy red. Jessica was pale, her lips a thin, bloodless line. It names his wife, Sarah Harrison, Anya declared. She looked directly at me. It leaves everything to you, unconditionally. The silence that followed was a physical blow. Richard snatched the document, his hands trembling as he flipped through the pages. He saw the signatures. He saw the notarized stamps. He saw the single damning clause. This is a forgery, he sputtered, throwing the will onto the table. She manipulated him. He was sick. He was sharp as a tack until the very end, and you know it, I said, my voice cutting through his blustering. He knew you. He knew exactly who you were. The letters from his oncologist, his cardiologist, and his primary care physician state otherwise, Anya said coolly. They are attached. Feel free to read them. Or, if you prefer, we can depose them in court. Your choice. Eleanor stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. She was no longer a woman sculpted from ice. She was a creature of pure hot rage. This is an insult, an attack on this family. We will fight this. We will contest it. We will drag you through the mud for years, you little gold digger. The word hit me, but it no longer had the power to wound. It was the desperate shriek of a cornered animal. I don't think you will, Anya said, her voice dropping, becoming more dangerous. She reached into her file and pulled out a second set of papers. They were smaller, simpler, promissory notes, because contesting the will means opening up the estate to full financial discovery. And that brings us to the matter of outstanding debts owed to the estate. She slid the notes across the table to Richard. His eyes widened in horror. He knew what they were before he even read them. According to these documents, signed by you, Richard, Anya continued, her voice methodical and relentless, you owe the estate $85,000 plus interest, a personal loan from your brother you never repaid. Richard stared at the papers, his face ashen. That was a family arrangement, a gift. Was it? I asked, leaning forward. I remember the night Mark wrote that check, the shame and disappointment in his eyes. I remember Mark telling you it was the last time, Richard. I remember him saying he wanted it in writing because he didn't trust you to have any honor about it. The memory, spoken aloud, was a dagger. Richard flinched as if I'd struck him. Eleanor rushed to his defense. You will not speak to my son that way. That money is a private matter. It's not private anymore, Anya stated. It's a legal debt. And as the sole executor and beneficiary of the estate, Sarah has instructed me to collect on it with interest. We will be filing for a lien against your assets if it's not paid in full within 30 days. The room fell silent again, but this time it was the silence of utter defeat. They had come here as predators, ready to strip a carcass. Now they were the prey, caught in a trap they hadn't seen. The $640,000 was gone. Their inheritance was gone. And now they were the ones who owed money. Richard sank back into his chair, deflated. The arrogant man-child was gone, replaced by a stunned, pasty-faced failure. Jessica stared at her husband with a look of pure venom. The lieutenant, realizing her general, was an incompetent fool. But it was Eleanor who held my attention. Her rage had collapsed into a brittle, shaking fury. She pointed a trembling finger at me. You will regret this, she hissed, her voice cracking. Mark would be ashamed of you. No, I said, standing up to face her, feeling 12 floors taller than she was. Mark would be proud. He knew you would do this. He prepared me for this. He left me everything I need to fight you. I gestured to the will, the notes, the whole damn room. This isn't my victory, Eleanor. It's his. That was the final blow. Her face crumpled. Without another word, she turned and swept out of the room, her regal exit ruined by the tremor in her shoulders. Jessica gave me one last look of pure, unadulterated hatred, then scurried after her mother-in-law. Richard was the last to leave. He stood, gathered his worthless folder of papers, and looked at me, his eyes filled with a toxic mix of bewilderment and loathing. He was my brother, he mumbled, as if that explained everything, as if that entitled him to everything. Yes, I said quietly, and he was my husband. He had no answer to that. He fled. The glass door clicked shut, leaving Anya and me alone in the sudden ringing silence. The battle was over. The air settled. I looked out at the city, my city, and took a deep, shuddering breath. The rage was gone, replaced by something harder, colder, and far more durable. Anya came to stand beside me, looking not at me, but at the door the Harrisons had just retreated through. "They won't give up," she said. "They'll be back, with lawyers, with threats, with dirt." I didn't turn from the window. I watched a plane cut a white scar across the blue sky, heading somewhere new. "I know," I said. "Let them come. Welcome to the fight." The click of the heavy oak door was a gunshot in the tomb-like silence. It was the sound of a final, definitive seal. The Harrisons were gone. The air in the suffocatingly white living room, once thick with their predatory entitlement, now felt thin and hollow, echoing with the ghosts of their threats and the visceral shock of their defeat. For a long moment, neither Anya nor I moved. I stood rooted to the pristine rug, my hand still clutching the envelope that had dismantled their world. My knuckles were white. My breath was a knot in my throat. Grief, for the past week, had been a block of ice in my chest. Now, a strange, volatile heat was beginning to melt it from the inside out. It wasn't relief. It was adrenaline. It was fury. It was the dawning, terrifying realization that I had won. "Well," Anya said, her voice utterly devoid of triumph. It was the cool, clipped tone of a surgeon who has just finished a complex procedure. She walked over to the bar cart, the one Richard had leaned against with such casual arrogance, and ran a finger over its polished surface, checking for dust. There was none. That went about as well as we could have hoped. I finally let out the breath I was holding. It came out as a ragged, shuddering gasp. "You were incredible." She turned, her dark eyes analytical. "You were credible, Sarah. That's what mattered. Mark gave you the ammunition. You just had the courage to pull the trigger." She looked around the room, her expression one of profound distaste. "I hate these houses. They're not homes. They're mausoleums for ego." Mausoleum. The word was perfect. I had just desecrated their temple. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The victory felt fragile, like a soap bubble I was afraid to touch. Anya walked back toward me, her heels making sharp, decisive clicks on the marble floor. "Now we leave. We file the second will with the probate court first thing tomorrow morning. We send a formal, notarized demand for repayment to Richard Harrison for the $85,000 plus accrued interest as stipulated. We get the insurance company a certified copy of the death certificate and the correct will, and the $640,000 will be transferred to you." She listed the steps like stones skipping across a still lake, calm, measured, each one creating a ripple. But I was watching the far shore where the tsunami was forming. "They won't just let it go," I said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. I could still see Eleanor's face. It wasn't the crumpled mask of a grieving mother who had lost an argument. It was the shattered, glacial fury of a queen whose crown had been snatched from her head in full view of the court. A mask of fractured porcelain, with pure, cold hatred peering through the cracks. "No, they won't," Anya agreed, stopping in front of me. "Greed is a powerful motivator, but humiliation? Humiliation is a religion. You didn't just take their money, Sarah. You took their power. You exposed them in their own house. You, the outsider. You, the help. You, the temporary fixture." Eleanor's words from my memory were a venomous whisper. I had proven them wrong, and they would never forgive me for it. "Let's go," Anya said, her tone softening just a fraction. "This place is enemy territory. The air is poison." She was right. I felt a sudden, desperate need to get out, to breathe air that wasn't saturated with Eleanor's cloying perfume and the bitter scent of their defeat. I followed Anya to the door, not looking back at the white throne where the matriarch had presided over my intended execution. I didn't need to. The image was burned into my mind. The drive back to my house was quiet. The manicured lawns and towering hedges of the Harrisons' neighborhood gave way to the familiar, comfortable streets of my own. With every mile that separated me from that pristine white mansion, I felt another layer of armor dissolve. By the time Anya pulled into my driveway, the adrenaline had crashed, leaving behind a profound exhaustion that was bone deep. My house, my little brick sanctuary, looked warmer than ever. It wasn't a museum. It was a place where life had been lived, where love had been real. It still smelled like him. Old books, coffee, and that sandalwood aftershave he'd worn for 20 years. Inside, I went straight to the kitchen and put the kettle on, my hands shaking slightly. Anya followed, leaning against the doorframe, watching me. "Tea?" I asked. "Please," she said. "Sarah, we need to talk about their next move." I nodded, my back to her as I lined up 2 mugs on the counter. We were back in the war room. A few minutes later, we were sitting opposite each other at the small kitchen table, the steam from our cups curling between us. The promissory notes and Mark's second will lay on the table like weapons laid out for cleaning. "They can't contest the will," Anya stated, her focus absolute. "The letters from the doctors make any claim of diminished capacity laughable. It would be dismissed with prejudice. They know that. Their lawyer, if he has half a brain, knows that. So, what will they do? They will come after the one thing they have left to attack, you." The words hung in the air. It was exactly what I had been thinking, but hearing Anya say it gave the fear a concrete shape. "Eleanor's power is social," Anya continued, her voice low and strategic. "She operates in the world of reputation, of whispers, of closed-door conversations at the country club. She will try to paint you as a gold digger, a manipulative caretaker who took advantage of her dying son. She will try to poison the well, to isolate you, to make you a pariah." Blood money. Richard's accusation echoed in my ears. It wasn't a random insult. It was the opening salvo of their new war. "Richard is simpler," she went on. "He's a cornered animal. My guess? He'll try to hide assets, declare that the promissory notes were a gift he never intended to repay. He'll try to drag this out in civil court, hoping to bleed you dry with legal fees. He'll do it out of spite." I thought of his entitled smirk, now replaced by the slack-jawed shock of a man who had never been told no in his life. The humiliation he felt in that moment was a poison he would spend the rest of his life trying to spit back at me. "And Jessica?" I asked, thinking of the silent, watchful sister. "Jessica is the most dangerous," Anya said without hesitation, confirming my own long-held suspicion. "She will be the delivery system for Eleanor's poison, the sympathetic friend who just happens to mention how worried they all were about Mark in his final days, the one who sighs and says what a shame it all is. She'll do it with a smile. She will be the one to twist the knife." I looked down at my hands, wrapped around the warm mug. For 20 years, I had absorbed their condescension, their veiled insults, their quiet dismissals. I had done it for Mark. I had let them define me as a footnote in their family history. No more. "Good," Anya said, as if reading my thoughts. "You're seeing the whole board now, so we don't wait for them to act. We act first." My head snapped up. "How?" "Richard's debt. We don't just demand repayment. We file a lien against his assets tomorrow. His house, his investment accounts, whatever we can find. We make it public. We force him onto the defensive immediately. It's not just about getting the money back. It's about controlling the narrative. Grieving family fights over inheritance is one story. Man who owes $85,000 to dead brother's estate tries to steal widow's insurance is another story entirely. A cold, sharp clarity cut through my fatigue. Anya wasn't just a lawyer, she was a fighter. She understood that this was no longer about legal statutes. It was about public perception. It was about defining the enemy before they could define me. And Eleanor? I asked. Eleanor is harder. We can't stop her from talking, but we can arm you. We document everything. We build a fortress of truth around you, and we let her scream at the walls until she's hoarse. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. But this brings up the most important question, Sarah. What do you want? What do you mean? I want what Mark left me. I want them to leave me alone. Is that all? Anya pressed. Because we can secure the money, and we can make Richard's life very difficult. We can win the legal battle, but making them leave you alone? That's not a legal remedy. That's a surrender. And they don't strike me as the surrendering type. I stared at the will on the table, Mark's elegant, forceful signature at the bottom, the letters from the doctors, the promissory notes. This wasn't just a collection of documents. It was a final act of love, a final act of protection. Mark knew them. He knew exactly who they were, and he had spent his last lucid days forging a shield and a sword for me. To simply take the money and hide felt like a betrayal of that final desperate act. It felt like letting them win in a different way, by chasing me from the field. My name is Sarah Harrison. I am 48 years old. My husband is gone. For 20 years, I was the quiet wife, the accommodating daughter-in-law, the woman who smiled politely through 1,000 tiny cuts. That woman died with Mark. I looked up at Anya, and for the first time since he passed, the ice in my chest was completely gone. In its place was a fire. It was cold, it was clean, and it was utterly resolute. No, I said, my voice clear and steady. That's not all. I don't want them to leave me alone. I picked up Richard's promissory note, the paper crisp between my fingers. I want justice, I said, and I want them to pay. Silence. It descended on the suffocatingly white living room, not as an absence of sound, but as a physical weight. It was the sound of 3 lifetimes of entitlement crashing into an immovable object. My object, Anya's object, the truth. Richard's face, which had been a mask of blustering indignation, had collapsed. The ruddy color drained away, leaving behind a pasty, slack-jawed shock. His eyes, small and predatory just moments ago, were now wide with the panicked look of a cornered animal. The promissory note sat on the glass table between us, a verdict in black and white, $85,000. The number seemed to hang in the air, shimmering with its own specific gravity. Jessica, his venomous whisper of a wife, had her hand clamped over her mouth. Her knuckles were white. For the first time since I'd met her, the counterfeit sweetness had been scrubbed from her expression, revealing the raw, ugly panic beneath. She wasn't looking at Richard, the source of their humiliation. She was looking at me. You, the outsider. You, the help. Her eyes weren't just angry, they were full of a shocked personal hatred. I had not only defied them, I had dismantled their narrative. But it was Eleanor who held my gaze, the matriarch, the woman sculpted from ice and disapproval. The ice was cracking. For a split second, her carefully constructed facade of tragic grace shattered, and I saw the molten fury beneath. Her lips, a thin, merciless line, had gone bloodless. Her hands, which had rested so regally on the arms of her throne-like chair, were now clenched into fists, the manicured nails digging into the pristine upholstery. The clinking of her pearls had stopped. The air around her felt volatile, electric with a rage so profound it was almost visible. This is what it looks like when a queen is deposed in her own court, I thought. The satisfaction was a hot, clean fire in my chest, burning away the last vestiges of grief's numbness. "Mark, you should see this." Anya, ever the conductor of this brutal symphony, let the silence stretch until it was screaming. She then leaned forward, her voice utterly devoid of warmth, a surgeon making the final, precise cut. "My office will be in touch tomorrow with the wire transfer details for the $85,000, she said, her gaze fixed on Richard. "We expect the funds to be settled within 10 business days. Failure to comply will, of course, result in immediate legal action to collect the debt, plus interest and all associated legal fees. The estate's position is robust." She smiled then, a flash of sharp white teeth. It wasn't a friendly gesture. It was the baring of fangs. "I'm sure you understand." Richard opened his mouth, a faint gurgling sound escaping, but no words followed. He looked to his mother for a lifeline, but Eleanor's eyes were still locked on me, promising a retribution that had nothing to do with courts or money. Anya stood, the movement crisp and final. "We're done here." I rose with her, my spine straight, my chin high. For 20 years, I had walked out of this room feeling smaller, diminished, an inconvenient footnote in their family history. Today, I walked out as the author of its next chapter. Anya gathered our copies of the documents, sliding them back into her leather briefcase with a decisive snap of the locks. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the tomb-like quiet. We didn't rush. We walked, our heels clicking a steady, defiant rhythm against the polished marble of the foyer. I didn't look back. I could feel their eyes on me, 3 pairs of them, burning with a hatred that felt physical. It was the declaration of war. The heavy oak door closed behind us, cutting off the oppressive chill of the mansion. Outside, the late afternoon air was cool and clean. I took a deep breath, the first real one I'd taken all day, and the scent of rain-washed lawns and damp earth filled my lungs. It smelled like freedom. In the plush leather interior of Anya's car, the adrenaline began to recede, leaving a tremor in my hands. I stared out the window as the grand, imposing gates of the Harrison estate slid past, shrinking in the rearview mirror until they were gone. "Well," Anya said, her voice finally losing some of its razor-sharp edge, "that went about as well as it could have." I let out a shaky laugh that sounded more like a sob. "You were incredible. The look on their faces." "They're used to people folding, Sarah," she said, navigating the winding suburban roads with practiced ease. "Bullies always are. You hit them with the one thing they weren't prepared for, a bigger bully." She glanced at me. And the truth. A comfortable silence settled between us. The victory was real, tangible. The money was safe. Mark's name was safe. But a cold knot was forming in my stomach, replacing the triumphant fire. They were humiliated. People like the Harrisons didn't just accept humiliation. As if reading my mind, Anya spoke again. "This was just round 1. I turned to look at her. "What do you mean? The will is ironclad. The debt is documented. What else can they do?" "The legal fight is over," she confirmed. "They know it. They have no standing, no leverage. They won't come at you through the courts again. They'll come at you another way." She paused, her expression hardening. "Eleanor's power was never legal. It was social. They're going to try to destroy your reputation. They'll paint you as a gold-digging opportunist who took advantage of a sick man. They will whisper in every ear that will listen. They will try to poison every memory your friends and community have of you and Mark. They will try to isolate you until you break. Blood money. Richard's accusation echoed in my mind. It wasn't just a desperate gambit, it was a dress rehearsal. "They've already started," I said, the words tasting like ash. Before the funeral, Jessica was already planting seeds, telling people I was fragile, hinting that I was pushing Mark to liquidate assets. "And now they'll escalate," Anya said grimly. "They lost the war for the estate. Now they'll wage a war of public opinion. Be ready for it. Don't answer calls from numbers you don't recognize. Don't engage with concerned friends who are just fishing for gossip on Eleanor's behalf. Everything goes through me. We fight them in the light, not in the shadows they live in." She was right. I knew she was. The relief of my victory was already being replaced by a cold, clear-eyed fury. They weren't just trying to steal Mark's money anymore. They were trying to steal our story. When I got back to the house, the quiet felt different. It was no longer the oppressive silence of fresh grief, but the calm of a headquarters after a successful mission. It still smelled like him, old books, coffee, and sandalwood aftershave. But the scent was no longer a punch to the gut. It was a reminder, a validation. I walked into his office, my war room, and stood before his desk. The second will was still lying there, next to his letter to me. I picked up the framed photo I kept on the corner of the desk, the two of us on our 10th anniversary, laughing on a beach in Mexico, his arm wrapped securely around my shoulders. "I did it, Mark," I whispered to the smiling man in the picture. "I didn't let them walk all over me. I fought." "Just like you told me to." Tears welled, but they weren't the hot tears of sorrow. They were cool, quiet tears of pride and resolve. I had honored him. I had protected what he'd built, what we'd built. The landline on his desk, a relic we never got rid of, suddenly shrilled. The sound was jarring, an intrusion. I stared at it, Anya's warning echoing in my ears. "Don't answer calls from numbers you don't recognize." The caller ID was blocked. I let it ring, counting each one like a heartbeat. 4, 5, 6. It finally stopped, and the machine picked up. A moment of silence, then a voice I hadn't heard in years filled the room. It was Carol Peterson, a woman who'd been one of Eleanor's closest friends, part of her inner circle of social vipers. Her voice was an oozing performance of sympathy, so fake it felt oily. "Sarah, dear, it's Carol. I just heard from a devastated Eleanor. I am simply heartsick about what happened today." A dramatic pause. "I know you must be grieving, but to use Mark's passing to threaten his own family, everyone is just so worried. Eleanor said you seemed like a different person, so cold and calculating. We all just hope you haven't let this tragedy and all that money change who you are." The message ended. The machine beeped. I stood frozen, my hand still on Mark's picture. So cold and calculating. The words were chosen with surgical precision, designed to wound, to plant doubt, to reframe me as the villain. This was it. The first shot in the new war, a war of whispers and lies. My fingers tightened on the picture frame. The old Sarah would have been wounded. The old Sarah would have been devastated, desperate to call Carol back and explain, to defend herself. But the old Sarah died with Mark. I reached over and pressed the delete button on the answering machine. The message vanished with a quiet whir. They thought they could break me with whispers. They thought they could shame me into hiding. They were wrong. The battle for the inheritance was over. The war for my name had just begun. Silence descended, heavy and absolute. It was not a peaceful quiet, but the dead, airless vacuum left behind by a detonation. The documents lay on the polished mahogany table between us. The second will, the doctor's letters, the promissory notes. not as paper, but as the scattered debris of an explosion that had just dismantled the Harrison dynasty in this room. Eleanor was a statue, cracking from within. The glacial composure she wore like a second skin had fractured, revealing the seething magma of her fury. Her hands, previously folded with regal grace in her lap, were now clenched into white-knuckled fists on the table's edge. Her face, a mask of aristocratic disapproval moments before, was now just the face of an old woman who had lost. The loss was a poison, clouding her eyes, tightening the skin over her cheekbones. Richard was a deflated balloon. The arrogant bluster, the entitled puffery, it had all been bled out of him. He stared at the promissory note bearing his signature, his face a blotchy, pathetic canvas of disbelief and rage. He looked trapped, a cornered animal realizing the cage was of his own making. Next to him, Jessica was a venomous whisper made flesh. Her silence was louder than Richard's sputtering shock. Her eyes, fixed on me, were two chips of obsidian promising retribution. She was the one I still feared the most. She would not forget this humiliation. Anya began to pack her briefcase. The clicks of the latches were like gunshots in the suffocating stillness. Each snap was a punctuation mark on our victory. She moved with an unhurried, deliberate precision that was its own form of dominance. She didn't look at them. She didn't need to. I rose from my chair, my legs steadier than I expected. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me, pushing back the frantic trembling that had lived in my limbs for days. I looked directly at Eleanor, holding her gaze until she was the first to look away, her eyes dropping to the table as if the polished wood held some profound answer. It held nothing but her own reflection. You, the outsider. You, the help. You, the temporary fixture. Her words from years past echoed in my mind. I met Anya's eyes. She gave me the slightest of nods. It was time to go. We walked out of the conference room, our footsteps echoing on the marble floor of the lobby. We didn't look back. We left them there, entombed in their failure, surrounded by the pristine, suffocating wealth that could no longer protect them. It was not a grand exit. It was a quiet one, and it was the most powerful thing I had ever done. The cool, damp air outside felt like a resurrection. It was drizzling, the city smelling of wet pavement and exhaust, and I had never been so grateful for it. It was the smell of the real world, a world away from the sterile, oxygen-deprived atmosphere of the Harrisons. "You can breathe now, Sarah," Anya said as she unlocked her car. Her voice was soft, but held the same no-nonsense edge. I got in, the scent of leather and Anya's crisp, clean perfume a grounding presence. As she pulled into traffic, I watched the law firm's imposing glass and steel facade recede in the side mirror. "They're not just defeated," Anya said, her eyes on the road. "They're humiliated. That's more dangerous." "Eleanor won't let this go," I murmured, my voice hoarse. "This isn't over." "No, it's not." She glanced at me, her expression sharp and focused. "The legal battle is. The probate court will honor that will. The doctor's letters make any competency challenge a non-starter. They know it. Their lawyer knows it. That front is closed." She paused, navigating a turn. "But you've just declared war on a monarch. She's lost her kingdom, so now she'll try to burn down your village. Expect a war of reputation. A war of reputation." The phrase landed with a thud. I thought of the clubs, the charities, the tight-knit community of old money and influence Eleanor commanded. I had been on the periphery of that world for 20 years, an outsider always looking in. Now I would be the target at its center. "She'll call her friends," I said, thinking aloud. "She'll paint me as a gold digger, a manipulator who took advantage of a sick man." "She'll do more than that," Anya corrected, her tone grim. "She will try to socially and professionally isolate you. Any boards you sit on, any friends you share, She will make it her life's mission to dismantle your credibility piece by piece. She will use her money and her influence to make you a pariah. Grief was a block of ice in my chest. Now a new feeling coiled around it, a cold, clean blade of anger. Mark knew this would happen. He knew his family. This was why he had prepared me so thoroughly. It wasn't just about the money. It was about my survival. And Richard? I asked, the name tasting like ash. The $85,000? I'll have my office send a formal demand for repayment to his counsel tomorrow morning. He has 30 days to respond. If he doesn't, we file a suit to collect. It's a simple breach of contract. Given that he owes the money to the estate, and you are the sole heir of that estate, she let the sentence hang in the air. He has to pay me, I finished. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. The man who tried to steal $640,000 from me would now be forced to write me a check. He will fight it, Anya stated, as if it were an established fact. Not because he thinks he can win, but to drag you through a public proceeding, to cost you money and time. It's a spite tactic. Let him, I said, and the hardness in my own voice surprised me. Let him show the world exactly who he is. When Anya dropped me at my house, the drizzle had thickened into a steady, cleansing rain. I stood on the porch for a moment, letting the cool mist settle on my face. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a fortress, my fortress. I walked inside, the familiar scent of home wrapping around me, faint traces of lemon polish, old books, and the ghost of Mark's sandalwood aftershave. I went straight to his office, my war room. The box of his preparations was still on the floor where I'd left it. I knelt and ran my hand over the cardboard. This wasn't just a box of papers. It was an arsenal. It was the last and greatest gift from the man I loved. He had armed me from beyond the grave. I picked up the silver-framed photo from his desk. It was from our trip to the coast 10 years ago. The wind whipping my hair across my face, Mark's arm tight around my shoulders, both of us laughing into the camera. The ache of his absence was still a physical pain, a hollow space carved out of my center. But for the first time since his death, looking at his smiling face didn't just bring tears, it brought strength. You knew, didn't you? I thought, tracing the line of his jaw with my thumb. You knew they would do this. You knew I had to be ready. The victory in the lawyer's office wasn't just mine. It was ours. He had laid the foundation, and I had seen it through. The thought didn't erase the grief, but it reshaped it. Grief was the river. This righteous anger was now the current, swift and powerful, carrying me forward. I was no longer just the quiet widow. I was the executor of his will in every sense of the word. My phone buzzed on the desk, a jarring intrusion into the quiet. I glanced at the screen. Eleanor Harrison. My blood ran cold. I stared at the name, a name that had represented 2 decades of quiet condescension and veiled insults. A name that had tried to render me penniless and powerless just hours ago. My thumb hovered over the green accept icon. What could she possibly have to say? An apology? A threat? A negotiation? I let it ring and ring and ring. The buzzing finally stopped, plunging the room back into silence. I took a deep, shuddering breath, a small measure of control. I had not answered. The choice had been mine. A second later, the screen lit up again. A text message. It was just 4 words. 4 words that were not an ending, but a new, chilling declaration of war. This is not over. The screen glowed with a sterile, unforgiving light. The 4 words sat there, stark and black against the white background, less a message than a verdict. This is not over. The air in Anya's office, which had moments before crackled with the electric thrill of victory, suddenly went dead. The elation that had buoyed me up, the heady mix of relief and vindication, dissolved like sugar and acid. I stared at the phone in my hand, my thumb hovering over Eleanor's name. It felt less like a device and more like a live grenade with the pin pulled. Anya, who had been gathering her files with a look of crisp satisfaction, noticed the shift in my posture. Her movements stilled. "Sarah, what is it?" I held the phone out to her without a word. Her sharp eyes scanned the message. I watched her face, expecting to see a flicker of concern, perhaps even frustration. Instead, a slow, predatory smile touched her lips. It was the expression of a chess master who sees her opponent's clumsy, rage-fueled move and knows it has opened them up for the kill. "Well," she said, her voice a low hum of anticipation. "She's predictable, I'll give her that." She handed the phone back to me. "Welcome to Phase 2. I sank back into the leather chair, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a profound weariness. Phase 2? Anya, we won. You dismantled them. The will is ironclad. The promissory notes are undeniable. What else is there? The law, Anya said, leaning against her desk and crossing her arms. Her gaze was intense, utterly devoid of false comfort. The law is a structured, logical battlefield. Evidence, precedent, statutes. We won there because Mark gave us better weapons. But Eleanor doesn't live on that battlefield. She never has. She began to pace, her heels making sharp, decisive clicks on the polished floor. Her battlefield is reputation. It's whispers in country clubs, concerned phone calls to mutual acquaintances, carefully worded condolences at charity galas. It's a world with no rules of evidence, where hearsay is gospel, and the person with the most social capital writes the official history. A cold dread, heavier than grief, began to settle in my bones. I knew exactly what she meant. I had lived on the fringes of that world for 20 years, a silent observer of its cruel, subtle machinations. She's going to paint you as a gold digger, Anya continued, her voice sharp and clinical. The quiet, unassuming caretaker who took advantage of a sick man, who isolated him from his loving family and manipulated him into signing his fortune away. They'll use your loyalty, your quietness, your very presence over the last 2 decades as proof of your long, patient con. Blood money. The phrase echoed in my mind, no longer an insult hurled in a moment of fury, but the cornerstone of a carefully constructed narrative. You, the outsider. You, the help. You, the temporary fixture. They weren't just trying to steal money anymore. They were trying to steal my story, to erase the 20 years of love I shared with Mark and replace it with a sordid, transactional lie. They wanted to poison the memory of him too. That thought was what rekindled the fire. Grief was a block of ice in my chest, but this new anger was a flame, hot and pure. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "How do we fight whispers?" "We don't," Anya said, stopping in front of me. "We don't chase their lies. We don't get into a slinging match in the mud. They're masters of that game. We'd lose. Instead, we build our own narrative, a better one, a truer one. And we build it on a foundation of granite while they're building theirs on sand." She tapped her temple. "The war moves from the courtroom to the court of public opinion, and right now you need to go home, to your sanctuary, to Mark's office. You've been through enough for one day." Her words were a dismissal, but a kind one. She was right. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. I drove home in a daze, Eleanor's message pulsing in my mind's eye. This is not over. It was a threat, but it was also a promise of more pain, more conflict, more of their suffocating presence in my life. My house, which had felt so empty since Mark's death, now felt like the only safe harbor in the world. I walked into his office, the scent of old books, coffee, and the faint lingering trace of his sandalwood enveloping me. It still smelled like him, my sanctuary. Anya's word echoed in my head, but it wasn't just a sanctuary anymore. My sanctuary had become my war room. I sat at his desk, the polished mahogany cool beneath my forearms. The box containing his final gifts to me was still there. I lifted the lid and took out the last letter he had written. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, my eyes scanning the familiar, beloved handwriting. Fight them, Sarah. Don't let them diminish what we had. Don't let them win. When I had first read those words, I thought he meant the legal fight, the battle for the will and the insurance. I thought that fight was now over. I was naive. Mark, as always, had seen further. He knew his family. He knew their malice wasn't limited to finances. He knew they would come for our life together, for the truth of it. This letter wasn't just ammunition for a legal meeting. It was my shield and my sword for the war to come. The phone rang 3 days later. It was a number I recognized but hadn't heard from in months. Caroline Preston, a woman whose husband did business with one of Richard's failed ventures. She was a social acquaintance, someone I'd see at the occasional corporate dinner. Her conversation always a breathless cascade of barely veiled gossip. "Sarah, darling," she began, her voice laced with a morbid, breathless excitement. "I am just calling to see how you are. We were all so devastated to hear about Mark." Simply devastated. Here it comes, I thought. The first shot had been fired. "It's been difficult, Caroline, but I'm managing," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Oh, I can only imagine," she gushed. "And with everything else on top of it, it's just ghastly. Eleanor was at the club yesterday, you know, looking so tragic, so brave. She told a few of us, in the strictest of confidence, of course, about the difficulties with the estate." My knuckles were white where I gripped the phone. Difficulties? Well, you know, that Mark hadn't been himself for quite some time, that he'd become so isolated. She said the family is terribly concerned that he wasn't in a sound state of mind when he made certain recent arrangements, that they only want to protect his legacy from, well, you know, undue influence. Undue influence. The legal term, stripped of its courtroom context and wielded as a social stiletto. It was a masterpiece of character assassination, painting me as a master manipulator, a quiet predator who had isolated a vulnerable man from his loving family, and them as the tragic heroes trying to save his memory. The narrative was set. The poison was already seeping into the water table of their social world. "She's telling everyone you're refusing to let them see the family doctor's reports," Caroline added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "That you're hiding things. It all sounds so awful. I just wanted you to know what people are saying." She wanted to be the first to deliver the bad news. She wanted the drama. But in doing so, she had given me a gift, confirmation of their strategy. "Thank you, Caroline," I said, my voice as cold and clear as ice. "You've been very helpful." I hung up before she could respond. For a moment, I just stood there, the phone in my hand, vibrating with a rage so profound it was almost silent. They were twisting my 20 years of devotion into a weapon against me. They were using Mark's illness not as a source of tragedy, but as an opportunity. They thought I would hide. They thought I would absorb the blows, just as I had absorbed their slights and condescension for 2 decades. They thought I would retreat into my grief and let their lies become the accepted truth. They were wrong. I looked at Mark's letter, still sitting on his desk. Don't let them diminish what we had. His voice, his command was clearer than ever. I picked up the phone again and dialed Anya's number. She answered on the second ring. Anya Sharma. It started, I said, no preamble necessary. Eleanor is telling people Mark was mentally incompetent and that I isolated him. She's framing me as a predator. There was a brief pause on the other end, not of surprise, but of calculation. Good, Anya said, her tone sharp as flint. Let her get the story circulating. Let them all whisper their ugly little theories. Why? I demanded. Why let them spread these lies? Because, Anya replied, and I could almost hear that predatory smile in her voice. It's much more effective to disprove a story that everyone is already talking about. She's building the stage for us. Now, what's our first move? I took a deep breath, the anger solidifying into something hard and purposeful. A plan, a strategy. I was no longer just defending. I was preparing to attack. Mark's letter, I said, and his medical records, the ones from the 3 specialists certifying his sanity. We don't whisper them in a country club. We publish them. A silence stretched for a beat, and then Anya let out a low laugh. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated admiration. Now you're thinking like a fighter, Sarah. Now we're ready for war. My gaze fell on Eleanor's text message, still open on my phone. This is not over. I finally typed a reply, my finger steady. It was only 2 words. You're right. Then I deleted it. She didn't deserve a response. She deserved to be blindsided. Let them talk, I said to Anya, my voice a low promise. We're about to give them something to read. The click of the front door closing was as final as a judge's gavel. Silence rushed into the office, a physical presence that pushed against my eardrums. The air, thick with the ghosts of their threats and the lingering, cloying scent of Jessica's perfume, tasted of ozone, like the charged stillness after a lightning strike. My hands, resting on the cool mahogany of Mark's desk, were trembling. Not from fear, from the violent, shuddering release of adrenaline. Anya let out a single, sharp exhale. It wasn't a sigh of relief, but the sound of a predator who had finished a satisfying, if necessary, meal. A thin, dangerous smile touched her lips. Round 1, she said, her voice a low hum of victory. Ours. Ours. The word echoed in the sudden quiet of the room. For 20 years, it had always been us, me and Mark. Now there was a new us, an alliance forged in the fire of the Harrisons' contempt. I looked at this woman, this stranger, who had become my shield and my sword in the space of a few hours. Is it over? The question felt naive the moment it left my lips. Anya's smile vanished, replaced by the sharp, focused look of a general assessing the next battlefield. The legal ambush is over, Sarah. The war is not. What we just did was win a decisive public battle. They came for your money, we took their power. People like Eleanor Harrison do not tolerate being stripped of their power. She leaned against the edge of the desk, her posture casual, but her eyes missing nothing. They lost in the arena of law. Now, Eleanor will move the fight to her own territory, the court of public opinion. She's already on the phone, I guarantee it. My stomach tightened. What will she say? The same lies, but wrapped in the silks of tragedy, Anya stated, her tone utterly devoid of warmth. She will paint you as the manipulative caretaker who took advantage of a sick, vulnerable man. She'll say you isolated him from his loving family. She'll whisper that you coerced him into signing that will. Every word will be a poison designed to ruin your name in the circles you and Mark shared. She can't take the money, so she will try to take your reputation, your friendships, your history. The image was so clear, so venomous. Eleanor, with her tragic grace, her voice oozing a sympathy so fake it felt oily, spinning her tale to anyone who would listen. She would dismantle my life one whispered lie at a time. Blood money. The phrase hit me again, not like a slap this time, but like a slow drip poison. "And Richard?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "His humiliation is a dangerous motivator," Anya said. "We'll have a formal demand letter for the $85,000 on his desk by tomorrow morning. He has 30 days to respond. He'll either pay up to make this go away, or his ego will force him to retaliate." How? A frivolous lawsuit. He could sue you for anything: undue influence, emotional distress, the weather. It won't have merit, but it's not about winning. It's about draining you, forcing you into expensive, public, and painful depositions. It's a tactic of attrition. He'll try to make you bleed until you give up. The scale of their malice was breathtaking. This wasn't just about an insurance policy. This was about annihilation. They didn't just want to win. They wanted me to cease to exist, to be erased from Mark's story and replaced by their own fiction. Anya pushed off the desk and walked toward me. She placed a card on the polished wood beside my hand. "This is my personal cell, not my office number, mine. The moment you hear a whisper, the second a concerned friend calls, you call me. Don't engage, don't defend yourself, just document it and call me. We let them build their narrative in the dark. We will dismantle it in the light." She looked at me, her gaze intense, analytical. "You did well today, Sarah. You held the line. Now get some rest. The fight is just beginning." With a final sharp nod, she was gone. The front door clicked shut once more, and this time, the silence it left behind was absolute. I was alone in Mark's office, a room that had been my sanctuary, a library of our shared life. Now it felt like a fortress, the site of my first victory and the command center for a war I never wanted. The air still smelled of him, old books, coffee, and that sandalwood aftershave I'd bought him for 20 straight Christmases. The scent was a dull ache, a reminder of the man whose memory I was now forced to defend from his own family. My fingers traced the raised lettering of his name on a leather-bound copy of Moby Dick, his favorite. He loved the story of a man consumed by a singular, destructive purpose. Ironic, I thought, a bitter taste in my mouth. Grief, which had been shoved aside by the corrosive burn of adrenaline and anger, now crept back in. It was no longer a tidal wave threatening to drown me, but a block of ice in my chest, cold and heavy. This entire ugly spectacle existed for one reason: because Mark was gone, because the one person who had always stood between me and the icy disapproval of his family was no longer here to protect me. My eyes fell on the second will lying on the desk. "To my beloved wife, Sarah Harrison, I leave everything." It wasn't a prize. It was his final act of love, a shield he had forged for me from beyond the grave. He knew them. He knew exactly what they would do. The thought didn't comfort me. It enraged me. He had spent his last months not just fighting a disease, but planning a defense for the woman he loved. My phone buzzed, a jarring intrusion into the quiet weight of the room. I glanced at the screen. Carol Betham, a woman from the club, a woman Mark and I had shared countless dinners with, laughing over wine and complaining about golf scores. A friend, or so I thought. A cold premonition slid down my spine. I answered, my voice steady. Carol? Sarah, darling. Her voice was a confection of concern, thick and cloying. Oh, I'm so glad I reached you. I just had the most distressing phone call. I waited, my knuckles white where I gripped the edge of the desk. It was Eleanor, she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She is simply beside herself with grief, utterly shattered. She told me that you wouldn't let them see Mark in his final weeks, that you kept them away. And now, this business with the insurance. She's terrified you took advantage of him when he was, not himself. There it is, the first shot, fired not from a cannon, but from a poisoned dart, tipped with fake sympathy and delivered by a mutual acquaintance. The lie was so insidious, twisting my round-the-clock care for my dying husband into a sinister act of isolation. The hours I spent holding his hand, reading to him, just being with him, all of it now rendered ugly and transactional. She's trying to steal your history. Anya's words rang in my ears. A fury, colder and harder than anything I had felt during the confrontation, crystallized inside me. This was a deeper violation. The fight in the office had been about money and law. This was about love and memory. Sarah, are you there, darling? I just think, for your own sake, you should consider being more accommodating. A family is a family, after all. The condescension, the casual siding with the Harrison narrative was the final straw. My grief was a block of ice, but my anger was now a white-hot flame wrapped around it. They weren't just trying to take what was mine, they were trying to rewrite what was ours. My voice when I spoke was utterly devoid of warmth. It was the sound of chipped ice. "Thank you for the call, Carol," I said, the words clipped and precise. "It's been very illuminating." I ended the call before she could offer another drop of her poisonous pity. I stood there for a long moment, the phone growing heavy in my hand. They were wrong. They thought my quietness was weakness. They thought my tolerance was acceptance. They thought that without Mark, I would simply crumble. I was not crumbling. I was being forged. I walked to the window and looked out at the darkening street. The world felt different now, its edges sharper. The battle wasn't over. They had just opened a new front, and I would meet them there. This was no longer about defending what Mark had left me. It was about defending him. My fingers moved, dialing the number on the card without a second thought. It rang twice. Anya Sharma. Her voice was as sharp as ever. "Anya, it's Sarah Harrison." A pause. "Already?" "Yes," I said, turning from the window and surveying the office, my war room. "It's already started. Are you all right?" The question hung in the air. Was I all right? No. My husband was dead. His family was trying to destroy me. My friends were becoming vectors for their lies. I was not all right. I was something else. "No," I said, and my voice was new. It was not the voice of the grieving widow or the quiet wife. It was the voice of a woman who had found her cause. "I'm not all right. I'm angry. Eleanor started her war. It's time we started ours. Tell me how we dismantle a reputation."